¿Se oye, no? ¿Sí? Okay, so hello everyone, and welcome to this event organized by UNC RIAM panel related to sources of lack of housing affordability and evidence from different countries. First of all, I would like to thank the Association of Architects of Spain and also Madrid Association of Architects that is hosting this event here in Madrid. And I would like to point out that this event is a side event of a 3-day organization related to housing affordability, affordable housing activation that has been organized by this Architects Association of Spain. So the idea of this panel, I would introduce the speakers later on, is to explain the core of housing affordability problems in different countries, explained from the analyst knowledge. The panel could put together the actual cases of Scotland, Ireland, and Spain, and other East European countries. The panel will also discuss the potential financial solutions to reduce the dependence of these problems. So there will be many topics that will be discussed in this panel. Many of them are very actual discussion in many countries, such as the scope of the problem, the population cohorts more affected, the main drivers, the effects of lack of housing affordability, energy poverty, regulatory issues, potential solutions, and the role of finance. We will also talk about a case study, The City We Need is Affordable book. So, what is housing affordability? Housing affordability relates not only to the price of housing in different types of tenure, but also to the adequacy of the housing. And this adequacy is also related to energy poverty. So the house should be not only affordable, but also adequate and accessible. And these questions are going to be treated here today. Let me very briefly introduce the panel. Some of the panelists will be joining us online. Here with me, I have today Ramon Riera. Hello, Ramon. He holds a degree in law and a real estate master degree from the University of Barcelona. He is a property manager and real estate agent. Ramon has spent more than 30 years of his career working in the development of the Spanish real estate sector and its internationalization. Ramon is founder and owner of Eurofincas, a real estate agency founded in 1987 in Barcelona. He has been also vice president and treasurer of Barcelona Real Estate Agents, president of FIABSI Spain, secretary of FNAPI, Federation of Spanish Real Estate Association, FIABSI International Board of Directors member, and many other important posts at FIABSI. Today, he's also the International Director and Board Director of AIC, Catalan Real Estate Agents, and consultant of the Advisory Council of ACAE. On my left, I have Paloma Taltabul de la Paz. Dr. Paloma Taltabul de la Paz is a full professor on Applied Economics Department at the University of Alicante. She has been visiting scholar at University of California, of Berkeley, Georgia State University, and Florida International University, and Massachusetts Institute of Technology, MIT. Her research focus is in housing markets, real estate markets, and macroeconomics and energy and sustainable housing markets. She has written more than 40 books, chapters and books, around 80 academic articles in Spanish and international journals since 1996, and has participated in more than 40 research projects. Today, Professor Taltabul belongs to different international academic societies, committees, and she is the chair of REM, Real Estate Advisory Group of UNC, which is organizing this event, and she was outstanding academic member of the Housing Rent Market Observatory as the Spanish Ministry of Housing. Online will be joining us Mary Taylor. Dr. Taylor is recognized in UK as a housing pro-academic. Her expertise is mainly in social housing, especially in the not-for-profit sector providing affordable housing, which plays an important role in the Scottish system. She has held diverse roles, including organizational and professional leadership, research and teaching on housing at the University of Stirling, and conference contributor at home and abroad. Although retired since 1917, she remains committed to affordable housing, not just in Scotland and UK. She supports advice to the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, UNC, on housing. Conor O'toole. Dr. Conor O'toole is an associate research professor at the Economic and Social Research Institute and member of UNC Real Estate Markets Advisory Group. He previously held the position of manager, real financial linkages team, and senior economist at the Financial Stability Division of the Central Bank of Ireland. At the Central Bank of Ireland, Conor worked extensively on macroprudential policy issues with a specific focus on the mortgage market. He also worked on broader issues regarding the surveillance of household and corporate financing vulnerabilities. Finally, Raúl García-Rodríguez. Raúl leads the sustainability practice in risk advisory at Deloitte, Czechoslovakia. His experience includes more than 25 years of international appointments in public institutions and private corporations. Specialized in real estate assets investment, Raúl managed an investment portfolio of industrial and commercial real estate with development in renewable energy and agriculture, with a strong command in urban development, project finance, and technology adoption to be applied to real estate business, assets business. He's also involved in projects related to smart cities. He worked for the Economist Intelligence Unit, establishing a high-level politician, corporate, and academia network across the CE and CIS region. Raúl is a member of UNICE Real Estate Market Advisory Group, a team of specialists assisting the UN Committee on Housing and Land Management and the Working Party on Land Administration to develop sustainable real estate markets. Also cooperating with global think tanks and initiatives such as ESI Thought Lab and Premios Latinoamericanos Verdes. So, welcome everyone, those who are here and those who join us online. I won't take much time, so I would like to give the floor to Professor Taltabul, who will be talking about evidence sources from different countries about the lack of housing affordability. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Elena. And welcome all of you that are following this side event organized by the UNICE and REM. I'll take a few minutes to show you what REM is. And thanks for all presenters to introduce another view of an important issue, which is housing affordability. Could you please go ahead to the next slide? I have not, yeah. Yeah. And we are going to give like a mixed view about housing affordability in this session. Oh, it's here. Oh, thanks. Thank you. Thank you very much. Sorry for that. So let me take some minutes. As I said before, what REM is. So REM is a real estate market advisory group, which is an advisory group that help or support to the UNICE and the Housing and Land Management Secretariat and the committee. We have been recruited to give the perspective from the academia, from the experts on what is happening in housing market and real estate market. So this is our task. Basically, we assist and help organizing events like this or giving our experience on some matters that are some issues that matters a lot in housing and real estate market. So we are a total of 25 experts inside ARIEM, coming from, I think, more than 18 different countries, from all the UNICE region, and experts in different topics. There are universities, there are experts from associations like Ramon Riera is coming from FIAPSI, and other colleagues from him and in different parts of the world. What is important is to see which area we are experts. Housing finance, housing economics, housing market, energy sustainability, which is an increasing area that people are experiencing. Regulation and planning is also a huge area that our experts are working on. So today we are going to cover the lack of housing affordability, as Elena Bemsa told just a minute before. And let me take another few minutes to put on the table the relevance of the lack of housing affordability. There are several studies that say that housing affordability should be like a standard in every country, because the facility or how easy it is to reach a house, to create a household, is a key issue for a society. So the households needs to have access to housing to maintain the life cycle as, let me say, normal, in order to contribute sufficiently for the economic evolution. I'm an economist, so sorry for give the perspective from the economics point of view, but this is the lack of affordability creates a huge problem of household creation. Household creation, late household creation, means that the components of the household enter late on the labor market, have children later, and then this delay all the process in the society. So it's not good. Create long-term effect, negative effects, which is what we say, and it's key for the societies to be aware that these problems could create another problem. So this is the issue we are going to cover. And let me give you just some small statistics saying how housing affordability is quite related to two different aspects of the household. One is the poverty, how the households are poor or not poor, and the type of household, how lack of housing affordability affects especially to some type of households rather than others. And this is a key, very important issue. The results of lack of affordability that could be solved for some policy issues could define another type of poverties, like energy poverty. So this is the first of my slides, so only a few of them, so don't take much of your time. These differences, a measure of lack of affordability, I use the current measure, which is a ratio between the housing cost and income, but separating people from poor and no poor. So those households which income is lower than poverty line are in the orange, and the other are up of a poverty line in blue. So like 30% is the limit, is the threshold. So look at how in most countries, there are 33 countries in front of you. In most countries, poor people face a very huge problem of lack of affordability. The second message is, well, they impact heterogeneously depending on the tenancy type. So we have owners, rent at market price, and rent under market price. It's supposed, or I assume, that those tenants paying prices under market price. Under market price means that they are in cheap houses, probably public houses, right? So as you can see there in the figure, the lack of affordability problem affects not only to tenants, also to owners. The blue line, the blue column, are owners, and in some countries, the owners have much more problems than others. So it's not a direct association, a unique association between lack of affordability and tenancy. It's covered all the range. If you can see the 4 countries in the last, there are problem of lack of affordability associated to the tenants paying rent under price. So it's quite surprised, right? The next is how the effect is also asymmetric, depending on the gender. If you compare the previous one, well, you believe me, right? And if I just only take those households in which the first person is a woman, they face much more problems. At least 3 points more on lack of affordability than in the court than the rest of the average, right? And also, if we identify different households, you can see here those households with one person, only unipersonal households in the old countries. So you can see how, compared with the previous one, a single-person household face much more problems in more than 50% of the countries we have analyzed. And if we also take the households with children, the problems increase, so the ratio increased 3 points more than in the average in most of the countries, and change the countries. So the lack of affordability is very concentrated in most of the countries we are analyzing in a specific type of households. So this is something that we have to know, right? So thank you, and I think that it's much more important to hear my panelists this morning. I want to thank them all to be here and dedicate time to prepare the presentations and to prepare the speech, which is a speech explaining their experiences. Experiences are one of the best sources to increase the knowledge about housing affordability and take solutions and define solutions and take conclusions, right? So our first speaker is Mary Taylor. Mary Taylor has been very well presented, but Elena, and I assume that Mary is online. You can put Mary, please, online. Our technical people are prepared. Mary's coming. Mary is supposed to be here with us, but some problems that don't allow her to be in person here.
Government 2 years after the financial crisis.
Mary, you're on the main screen, just to note that.
Okay, thank you.
Mary's here.
I appreciate that. And Harriet as well.
Good morning, Mary.
That I don't know.
All I can see is the slide. I'll shut up. I'll write to you.
Hello, Mary. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi. nice to meet you. And it's your time. The floor is yours.
Okay. So I wanted to start by saying thank you for the invitation. And sorry I can't be with you in person today due to sickness. I've got some short remarks I want to make because I'm very interested in the discussion. And by the way, please interrupt me if I'm going too fast. So we're basically talking about two problems here. The first one is about high costs of housing. and what seem to be ever-rising costs of housing. And the second one is about low incomes of the people who need that housing. And there have to be mechanisms to be able to bridge between these two things and solve those problems. In the UK, we have a system of social security, which is part of the solution. And in Scotland, we have a particular dimension which is designed to subsidise the provision of new housing, affordable housing, through capital subsidy. So I'm just going to say a little bit about each of those, if that's okay. So across the UK, there's a system of social security which has a key component which allows people on low incomes to apply for support with housing costs. And approximately 10% of all the welfare spending in the UK is spent on housing costs. For people of working age, the system is called universal credit. The component that helps people with paying rent is open to anyone on a low income, whether they're living in private housing, which is usually a private landlord seeking to make a profit, or social housing, which is not for profit. Although the support can potentially cover up to 100% of the cost, in practice, it's usually less for a number of reasons. First of all, the government sets an eligible amount according to local market conditions, and I have some reference points here to give you examples if we have time later. But the eligible rent is also based on the needs of the household, not what they actually are due to pay in rent. So you can see how a gap would start to appear. This means the financial support that's actually paid will often be less than the rent paid, and the household has to make up the difference, remembering that they're already on a very low income. Where tenants of private housing are living in expensively rented housing, this is a particular problem. And in social housing, where often the housing is larger than people need, it may be that they have to pay for space in the house that they don't need because it's the only space available to them. I know that feels odd. It feels odd to us too. About £18 billion on this system. Spending started to increase, obviously, after the financial crisis from a level of 15 billion in nominal terms, which is just slightly less than now, but it climbed to 24 billion in 2015-16. And at that point, government started to pull back and reduce spending, which is how they've got it down to 18 billion. So to give you an idea of the amounts of money that tenants in social housing have in Scotland, recent research by the Scottish Federation of Housing Associations, my old employer, showed that 70% of tenants of social housing have an annual income of less than £20,000, and 42% have an income of less than £15,000. So these are low incomes by anyone's standards. But even at that, the rent is coming out at approximately 24% of income, which is lower than Wales and lower than England. The other element that I talked about at the very start was about high costs, and that's really where the Scottish Government has made strenuous efforts to progress with subsidy for the development of new affordable housing. Developers of private and social housing can be encouraged to increase the supply of affordable housing in different ways. The evolution of housing policy to the four parts of the United Kingdom means the system and priorities are different between each of them, as well as the market conditions and characteristics. In Scotland, the Scottish Government runs the Affordable Housing Supply Programme, so-called. It has now a target of 110,000 completions by 2032. It had an earlier target when I was still working of 50,000 by 2022, and that new target assumes that the 50,000 will have been met already. That is actually in some doubt, and I don't have up-to-date figures. I'm afraid they've not been published. So 110,000 affordable homes is a big commitment in a country the size of Scotland with a population of 5 million. The current Parliament has set a budget for investing in social housing, in affordable housing rather, at £3.6 billion, which works out at about 800 million a year, bearing in mind some of that is about getting projects on site, some of it is about completing them, so it's never within 1 year. Inevitably, there is a delay between design and completion, which means that spending doesn't fall neatly into financial years to allow tracking. But annual approvals, starts and completions are fluctuating around 10,000 a year, which is almost double what it was 5 years ago when the Scottish Government cut funding for this very programme. The government is currently committed to 70% of all that planned output for social rent, and that means below market prices, but not standards. And 10% of it goes to rural and remote communities, which means 90% is going into the urban country. So about 3/4 of the funding is distributed in the form of grants to social housing providers, that's the developers, at fixed levels of grants set in relation to the size of property being built and with high energy standards. They sometimes get a bit more the higher they go for energy standards. Subsidy for social rent sits currently at around 55% of total cost. Well, has been sitting at 55% of the total cost. So that's between 60 and 70,000 pounds, but costs are rising very fast. And my contacts in the industry tell me that the grant rate is not keeping pace with the increase in costs, and that is bound to create a problem. But again, there is no official data available. Pandemic and Brexit have created these problems in terms of materials, but also labour. So affordability for the tenants who may live in these houses is predicated on the estimates of building at the start of the project, not at what's achieved at the end. And this very aggressive inflation means that some projects which could be afforded in the capital sense may become unaffordable for the developer and therefore impossible to progress without a significant increase in subsidy. You can imagine that is the subject of extensive negotiations in and around government. So that was 75% of the money that's available in Scotland. The remaining 25% is spent at lower levels of subsidy per unit on private or private ownership, low-cost home ownership, or mid-market rent, as it's known. In the case of home ownership, the government retains a share in the property of between 20 and 40%. Like not quite a golden share, but in that kind of that sphere. And there are many, many small initiatives which produce 50, 100, 150 houses a year to help people maintain homes during a financial crisis. The only thing I would say finally is that the rent that those systems produce and have produced over many years is showing an average rent in social housing of £87 a week. Now, I haven't worked that out as a yearly amount, and the latest figures for which I was able to access were for 2018. And it's interesting to compare that with a private rent, an average private rent of 194. So the social rent is markedly less. And I know that we did work at the SFHA, which modelled the impact of spending money on housing support costs for private tenants paying higher rents as being much less economically valuable than investing subsidy upfront in social housing with lower rents, which means that people have got a lower rent to pay in the first place. I'm sure I've provoked lots of questions, I hope so, and I look forward to dealing with them in due course.
Thank you very much, Mary. Well, very important points have you put on the table. We probably have the opportunity to discuss them later on. So our next speaker is Conor O'toole from Ireland. Conor, are you there? I'm sure. Yes. So I kindly ask you to share your screen and put your presentation.
Bear with me 1 second while I do this.
Okay, now it's black.
Can you see the screen?
Nope. Not yet. Some technical issues now. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Are we?
Okay, go ahead. The floor is yours.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Paloma. And first, my thanks to you, Paloma, for all the work and effort putting together this session. It's really great to be able to contribute to it. And it's a huge amount of work goes into it. So thanks so much for putting it together. Very sorry I can't be there in person in Madrid. It would have been fantastic to be with you there, but I had to be here in Ireland yesterday for an event, so it wasn't possible to double locate just like that. So what I'm going to try and do over the next 10 minutes or so is bring you on a whistle-stop tour of what I see as the kind of main challenges of the housing affordability difficulties that we're facing here in Ireland from various pieces of research that we've done here in my research institute, the ESRI, over the past 5 years or so. So it's I think many of the difficulties that we're facing here domestically in Ireland are mirrored in many of the urban centres and other economies across Europe, but they certainly feel particularly acute here, and many of the challenges being a small open economy, a landlocked economy with a reasonably fast rate of economic growth are maybe compounding some of these challenges. So I'm going to hopefully be able to give you a lens into what's happening here and what we're doing to maybe spark further debate in an international context. So let me first talk about the brass taxes, the price changes here in Ireland. So what this chart does is it shows house price growth in the blue line, private rental growth in the red line, and local authority rental growth in the green line. The local authority rents are those that are paid by social housing tenants, and they're set specifically in relation to income, so those are differential rent relative to income. But then the market rents and the housing prices are market determined. So what you can see is very clearly that the series runs from 2006 to this year, into January of this year. What you can see is a huge downturn in house price growth and rental prices just in the financial crisis period in Ireland. So that occurred from 2008 through to 2013. And house prices fell, over 60% peak to trough, as did rents in that period. But there's been quite a marked and quite a sustained recovery since. And this has created a number of really, complicated challenges trying to deal with these augmentations. For example, the median house price in Ireland has risen to just under 300,000, and it's over 400,000 in the Dublin area, which is the capital here. So these very rapid and volatile price changes are making it very difficult both to plan from a delivery perspective, but also for households to purchase. You can see there was if you look at the blue line in the 2015 period, there was a moderation, quite a marked moderation in the house price growth. And that was around the introduction of macroprudential rules on borrower limits, for borrowing limits by the Central Bank of Ireland. And those have been able to break the cycle between credit growth and house prices, but also have created challenges for households being able to afford sufficient financing to purchase. So multitude of problems, all leading through into quite marked house price and rental price rises in Ireland. I think one of the things that's quite notable in the Irish case is that during the financial crisis, was a huge loss of construction sector capacity, in particular. A huge amount of construction firms went into insolvency. And that really, when the economy started to kick back in 2014 onwards, that created a challenge in terms of the delivery of new housing for what was a continually growing population through these periods. So I'm going to try and come back to some of those themes later on in the presentation. Okay, so let's think first about the affordability challenge. This is one of the things we've spent a lot of time doing, is trying to measure, get good metrics for affordability. So what I'm going to present today are some simple data, kind of similar to what Paloma was presenting earlier from the cross-country database. But this is specifically looking at Ireland and trying to get a better lens within country using the EU Silk data in Ireland. So what we're going to focus on is the housing payment to net income ratio. So we're not including any utility costs. This is purely either your rent payment or your mortgage payment. And we're going to be looking at it across different tenures, across different groups of the population, for example, across the income distribution. Then we're going to try and focus in on one definition, which is particularly well known in the international sphere, which is the 30% rule. So what proportion of a particular subgroup of the population spend more than 30% of their net monthly pay on housing cost, and that's used as an indicator internationally of high housing costs. So what I'm going to do is try and show you a couple of trends which dictate what has happened to these metrics over time in Ireland, and try and fill in the gaps in terms of explaining how these things have evolved. Okay, so the first slide here looks at the average housing payment to income ratio, split out here by tenure. So the purple line captures the mortgage market, so they're mortgaged homeowners. The blue line are market price renters, so they will be households who procure rental property on the private market and pay full market rent. The green line here, which you can see is very low relative to income, is the local authority social housing rents, and they're obviously set. They are set relative to income, so it would be completely expected that they would be lower here. And then the red line here is just the mean across all tenures. So what you can see, this chart starts in 2005, which is when the data set begins to become available to us. And you can see it's kind of rising throughout the period, and where I cut it off here at 2015, it has continued to rise over that period. The rental sector actually had seen a decline over the period to 2014, but that has actually risen quite dramatically in the last number of years, and I will focus in on that later in the presentation. But I think the structural differences here, which are really important to point out, are that the households in the private rental sector are spending a much higher share of their income, and that has been there since the data has been available, than particularly the social renters, but also than mortgaged homeowners. So you can see that, when we think about where the housing cost challenges are, this is particularly the case for those in the rental sector in Ireland. What I want to do is then think about, well, within those sectors, we know that different households will face different challenges. So let's cut these groups up by components of the market. So what we here do is we split households into 4 different groups across the income distribution. Q1 here being the lowest quartile of the income distribution, to in purple all the way through to the red group, which is the highest income households. And what's quite notable here is that you can see that the average payment in the mortgage market here on the left-hand side is really high. It's over 40% of net income on average for the lowest income households. And then there's quite a dramatic drop to the other 3 groups. So certainly this is a concentration of high housing cost burden for low income households. This is something that we'll come back to when we think about the policy implications. And one of the things to note in the mortgage market, which is on the left-hand chart here, is that there was a very rapid increase over the period 2008 through to 2012. And that coincided with the financial crisis here in Ireland, and the income shocks hit the lowest income households greatest, for they were the ones who suffered the labour market consequences to the greatest extent. So that's why the wasn't necessarily that the housing cost element was increasing rapidly here. Was that the income side was falling faster than the house price here. So that's what's driving this dynamic. And then moving to the rental sector on the right hand side, we can see again it's that bottom 25% of the income distribution that really is facing very high housing cost on average relative to net income. Okay, so let's try and get a benchmark then. If we use this 30% rule to try and understand what proportion of households are facing high housing costs. So the left-hand chart here splits up the market by tenure, and then within each tenure works out what proportion of households spend more than 30% of their net income on a housing cost. And what you can see here is that in the rental sector, nearly a third of households are spending more than 30% of their income, and that has been consistently the case throughout the sample period. The chart on the right-hand side then looks within the income distribution, and you can see there for the bottom 25% of the income distribution, nearly 70% of households are spending more than 30% of their income on housing costs. So that's really, really huge figure, and shows where the concentration of the challenges are. You can see then it drops then across the income distribution, and then the high income households, very few of those are facing high housing costs, and even those who are probably paying high housing cost to income ratios still have considerable residual income left after their housing costs. So these households are certainly not in stress. So let me just summarize where that leaves us. It leaves us with a housing market which has considerable affordability challenges. It has a concentration of those affordability challenges within the rental sector. Those affordability challenges are not universal. We can see the higher income households and those in the mortgage market aren't particularly strained by those metrics, but there is an acute affordability challenge for particular population subgroups, the bottom end of the income distribution, and those in the rental sector in particular. What that has really done is created this huge challenge about transitioning to home ownership. Home ownership really was always the tenure of preference for Irish households, has been for many, many years. And we, up to certainly into the early 90s, we had a very high home ownership rate. And what these rising rents and rising house prices and challenging affordability contexts have meant is that there's a much lower likelihood for younger households now to transition into home ownership. And two particular pieces of work that we've done has been trying to unpick that a little bit and look at why that has been the case. A piece of work we did trying to model that transition found that there were considerable challenges in terms of the access to finance required in terms of the leverage ratio to be able to bridge that gap, given where the house prices were in Ireland. But also the problem was that just many households weren't able to pass what we would standardly call like a typical credit risk assessment. And the problem then in Ireland is we don't have the sufficient supply of affordable rental or cost rental or even social rental to be able to pick up the gap for those households who weren't able to transition to home ownership. So that's been a consistent theme in our research. I think a couple of charts which can really kind of demonstrate that is if you look back across the age cohorts in Ireland back to 1987. So you can see the different color bars represent different age cohorts. So you can see the youngest group is in red, all the way up to the oldest group in the darker colors. What you can very clearly see is that while older age cohorts in each of the census years, that's what these data come from, have very high home ownership rates. But in very recent times, you can see in particular for the 25 to 34-year-old groups, but even for the 35 to 44-year-old groups, there's been a dramatic drop. Nearly for the bottom age cohorts, it's less than half the households are becoming homeowners in that age group than they previously were. So this is a kind of dramatic change in the Irish housing tenure landscape. And what's happening here is we're pushing these households into the rental sector, or leaving them longer in the rental sector than they traditionally would have been the case. And this is the corollary is, as I just said there, where do they go? They're ending up in this private rental sector, which is creating real challenges in terms of the capacity and the affordability in that sector, because it had historically always been set up as a transitionary tenure. It wasn't necessarily set up here in Ireland for longer term family living with secure long term tenancy arrangements with rent certainty. This now is the complication of how do we retrofit a sector like that into a landscape like Ireland. Okay, so if we take that backdrop, we have high rents, high house prices, younger households being priced out of that transition to home ownership, an affordability challenge in that low income renting group. What do we do to try and help potential first time buyers on the one side be able to transition where they are able to, and for those renters, what can we do to help them within the rental sector if they're staying in that particular tenure? I think one of the things that's particularly difficult to activate in an Irish context is housing supply. So we have a severely inelastic housing supply market, particularly around the Dublin region, and there's a multitude of reasons for that. But it is very problematic in terms of trying to get new supply online, and we're currently, there's average estimates of how many new houses we need to meet the population demands, and they're upwards of 35,000 units a year, and currently we're producing just over 20,000 units a year. So we're not even standing still in that context. So in that context, what's the most effective suite of policy measures? These will be on the supply side interventions. This is a range of schemes that the Irish government is trying to use to activate the land side. I think, to me, one of the most important and most innovative of these was the establishment of the Land Development Agency, which is a land management agency for publicly owned land. So they're going to finance and activate housing delivery for social and affordable housing in particular on state-owned lands and state-owned land banks. And I think that's particularly a good measure to be following. But there's an awful lot more we need to do on the supply side. There's a range of policies that have been available for potential purchasers, which can help bridge that leverage gap, both from a deposit side, from savings deposit side, but also an income leverage gap, such as shared equity schemes that are coming online this year. There's also a local authority loan product for those who can't get finance in the commercial market. And there's also a tax rebate, a help to buy scheme. So there's a range of these measures which can be beneficial and unlock credit access for households. But these do have the side effects that they are demand side measures, and given the supply inelasticities, these are likely to raise prices further. Yeah, I think this is a really interesting chart, which goes back to 1980, which shows the number of new housing units built in Ireland as a share of the number of persons aged 20 to 50, a kind of household forming age groups. And we can see in more recent years, we're not producing anywhere near the level we even did in the early 80s, in the mid 80s, when we had a strained macroeconomic climate here in Ireland. So certainly the supply side channels are particularly problematic. So what about the other renters? How are we helping them? Well, there's the main short-term support is the deployment of an extensive array of housing rent subsidies. The Ministry of Housing brought in the housing assistant payment in the in late 2016, 2017, which allows households who qualify for social housing, so their income, they meet the income brackets, but they can't get a property in the social housing by the social housing providers, to source a property in the private market, and then the local authority will pay the rent. They pay a differential income-based rent. So that's a really flexible product that has really been hugely successful in terms of its rollout, in terms of the number of households using it, but it has added demand-side pressure to the rental stock. And I think that's something we're going to have to work out how we unwind over time to kind of reset that. There also are subsidies for those households who have short-term income shocks. It's just a rent supplement, and all of these are trying to help those renters who find challenged affordability context in the short term. I think, as I mentioned earlier, one of the biggest problems for Ireland has been the development in an alternative rental sector. We haven't had a huge rental sector outside what's provided by the private market, which would have been an affordable or social rental sector for many, many years. And trying to build cost rental, for example, into the Irish system is happening, and this is moving forward, but it takes time. I won't labor this chart, but basically what this is basically showing is this is the share of renters who are not in receipt of any housing supports. And you can see in 2017, 2018, and 2019, the bottom end of the income distribution households in Ireland, so that's the purple and blue lines here, have dropped off, and that's because these households are now getting access to this HAP payment in particular. So therefore, the HAP payment is helping those at the bottom end of the income distribution that before 2017, I was identifying as having those challenges previously. So that's certainly a good news story for those households. Okay, so let me just conclude. I've probably gone on longer than my allotted time as usual on this, but let me just sum up quickly. So housing affordability challenges in Ireland, not universal, but very acute for particular cohorts of the market, in particular those low-income renters. And I think looking at all the macroeconomic projections we're doing now and looking at the outlook for the Irish economy, doesn't appear to be any valve that may let up the rise in house prices and rents that we're seeing at present. So certainly the challenges appear to continue. Going to need a multifaceted policy approach, which is there, with both supply side and demand side instruments, with the supply side being more important given the elasticities here. So let me leave it there. Let me again thank the chair and the session organisers, and I'm looking forward to fielding any questions and hearing all the other country contexts.
Thank you very much, Conor. Hi, thanks for your very clear presentation. So for a moment, I thought that you were speaking about Spain. So we are following quite similar trends. We have a lot of questions for you and for Mari later, but let's go ahead in the schedule of this morning. And Raúl García is our next speaker. He will give the bridge between housing affordability and the sustainability issues and green issues related to market, introducing the second huge topics this morning about energy poverty. So it's another poverty associated to lack of affordability, unfortunately. Is Raúl there?
Yes, here I am.
Okay, good. So, good morning, Raúl. Thank you for your participation in this panel, and the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here and for the very interesting conversations that we hear, the very interesting facts. As a matter of fact, not only will I try to bridge to sustainability, but also a little bit to financing, or rather than financing, the business itself behind. You know, I've been 15 years working as a developer. I've faced some of the problems that are creating now the problems for affordability. I think the most acute problem we have in the system when there is not enough units, so that as there is scarcity of a resource, of course the price goes up, and the scarcity here is of enough square meters to be provided to the people so that they can afford to live in there. We're seeing this in the region where I work mostly, which is Central and Eastern Europe. It's happening more than ever, and we identify the same problems everywhere. And this is what I tried to show you here. Let me put this on a larger screen. And I think the problems go along the value chain and the phases of development. If we take that in the value chain, you need to make sure about who owns the property, who holds the property rights. Then you have to add all the planning that goes within the project, the technology, and lastly, how is this going to give you a return on your investment? This is what you need to assess always when you assess a project financing in the development of housing or the development of any real asset, by the way. Now, then you have different phases, and of course the first phase is design, then you have to construct it, you use it, and then you demolish it. And so how do we see the problems here? Now, the first thing that we see here is that we have a problem with the ownership. There is not enough land activated or at enough speed so that there are enough production of units. When you go and you look into the general plans of any city, your problem is that there are not enough plots. And it doesn't have to be always new plots. It could be brownfield, but it has to be there. If there is not enough, of course, there's going to be a scarcity. So that's the first problem, and that links the first two keys of the value chain. Now, then we have to look into what technology are you going to use to construct. And this links directly to what you were just talking about, which is the efficiency on resources, and among those, energy. And we see today that people cannot even afford to heat their own houses. And this is a huge problem because we have not used the correct technology or the most advanced technology that there is. Of course, retrofitting units is expensive. It's not a sexy topic when you go to catch capital to do this. And the problem lies there in the system. How are we going to make sure that the debt financiers or the investors will see this as an investment, a long-term investment? Will they put this in their cash flow? Where do they see the break-even point for all these investments? There is a break-even point there, of course. We know that the savings are huge, but with the current prices on energy and the resources, we don't really know how to expose this to a bank or somebody who will give you the capital to tell them when are they going to get their money back. And this is a big problem because in the end, it's all part of a project finance that will be assessed whenever you are secure about what is the breaking point. So that's a very big problem here. And then, of course, the use itself. Who is going to use this and who can pay for it? And we're talking here whether you produce in units for selling or for renting. Are you renting it to which cohort, as Conor was explaining? You have a lot of problems identifying the source of income to return the investment that has been already. So the biggest problem lies within the developers themselves, because they need to see how are they going to finance everything. And doing this as a private entrepreneur is not really that feasible. You need some help from public to give you at least access to debt or at least access to the guarantees. Because the bigger problem in the end is the access to money and to have enough guarantees so that the project can be financed. And those guarantees could be bankable guarantees, could be coming from IGOs, could be coming from multilateral development banks, or could be coming from specific debt vehicles created by different countries, or even EU funds, as we see now. So this is a solution that will already make way for mezzanine financing, and that triggers the project itself. But you have to activate that, and not every country has that in their legislation, so it's not easy to access this. Then once this is all created, we see that in the development phases, it's much easier to show how in the phase of design, you create a cash flow with a feasibility study, you see where it's the cost-benefit analysis, the economic and financial cost-benefit analysis. So you create a project finance that is basically attracting investors. Of course, we're not talking about the same return on investment that you will have in non-affordable housing, but the problem can be bridged if you are able to, again, guarantee to the investors that instead of having a higher return on investment, they have a more secure or a longer return on this investment. If you are doing this by giving them access to land or by giving them access to finance or guarantees, then you surely will have private investors coming in and chipping in to help the public investors. And of course, the same guarantees and the same financing will go for the construction solutions. And then the problem will come back again when we are in the use phase. So that we have to help the people that are living there to afford their own houses. And in the places where we don't have those technologies implemented, that we're seeing that they're basically pouring out of resources, we have to help the retrofit. It's the only way to do this, because as we said in the beginning, it's not possible for everybody now to keep their houses. And we're seeing this across Europe. It's not only in the poorer places, in the richer places that used to be, now have problems with energy. And last but not least, and this is probably the most interesting about sustainability, is the circularity of everything that we're talking about. Not only the objects themselves, but also the parts of the city, the elements. This is what we're working more strongly in real estate, because there is not really that business case for circularity in real estate yet. We have to create this. There's a lot of efforts in creating new materials, in creating, rather than using polarized materials, we're using elements of construction, and we're trying to implement this also into the phases of design of the cities and the buildings. So that's a very big challenge that we have ahead of us. And I think this is more or less what I wanted to talk about. I had prepared some more information about how the COVID pandemic had changed the business for all the investors and developers. How things have come from the implementation of in real estate has changed completely the objects themselves, and this is something that has not yet been implemented. We know that now we want different kind of objects, we want different kind of buildings. We don't want anymore to be on high skyscrapers and tall buildings. We prefer to have more space, which again comes back to the first point that I posed today, which is the land activation. We want to be with, we want to have a terrace, we want to have a view. We don't want to be living concrete, because if something like what just happens again, then we will have not learned anything from what happened to us. And I think we have learned about this. So it's a question for the public sphere, for the public servants, civil servants, to understand how do we change the general plan of cities, the urban land development plans, so that in the future all these non-financial risks are also taken into consideration. And I will leave it here, because I know there is a lot of people and there is not too much time. So I'm very interested in talking to all of you later and see how we can perhaps bridge my overview from the private entrepreneur view to what you know, and so interesting. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Raúl, for your presentation, and the focus from the professional perspective is very interesting. Let me pass the floor to our next speaker, which is Ramon Riera. Ramon Riera is comes from FIAPSI, Barcelona, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Paloma. Thank you very much for your invitation, and for me it's an honor, it's a big honor to represent to FIAPSI International. And okay, energy poverty is my topic. If we want to reduce energy poverty, we must reduce poverty. Therefore, the ultimate goal, before defining what energy poverty is, must be to reduce poverty, because it will be the only way to reduce energy poverty. At the time that we should not ignore is that there are 860 million people in the world who live without electricity. In Spain, which is where I live, 7.2 million households experience conditions associated with energy poverty. Energy poverty, in household terms, is a situation in which income is zero or not enough to pay for enough energy to meet energy needs. Energy poverty includes the cost of heating, air conditioning, lighting, cooking, domestic hot water heating, and everything related to the basic needs of a household. The concept of energy poverty differs depending on the level of country's development. In developed countries, it is a problem of household finance or ability to pay energy bills. While in developing countries, it is a problem of access to modern energy sources such as gas or electricity, rather than the inability to pay for it. In both cases, there is a difficulty in accessing energy, and people's living conditions are affected. The causes that generate this energy insecurity are diverse, although the most important are low household income, insufficient energy quality of housing, high energy prices. In developed countries, there is an important factor that is the lack of support from the governments. To fully understand energy poverty, we must know that, unfortunately, there is not proportionality between income, wealth, and energy cost, since the poorest people pay more for energy than well-to the people. They pay a higher percentage of their salary on essential items, such as food and energy. The poorer the person, the higher the percentage, the poorest often do not have enough to pay for gas or electricity. Research by many food banks in the United Kingdom indicates that many people in need refuse basic foods like potatoes because they cannot afford to heat the water to cook them. Most energy bills have a non-variable part and a higher unit cost, which means that the poorest cannot reduce the cost of their bills by saving. That is, there are too many fixed costs, many taxes that governments could reduce and thus cause the difference between poor and rich. It is also relatively more difficult to choose another, cheaper provider if you have difficulty paying your energy bills. Poorer households often need more heat because the construction standard is at a lower level due to the quality of construction and lack of maintenance. This means that households have to waste the energy or accept colder conditions, or very often both. Families with children also have higher expenses in childcare, clean clothes, and heating. As energy prices increase, more people cannot heat their homes, heat water, cook, and feed their families with hot food. More and more people are forced to switch off the heating at home and spend the day in libraries, buses, or public places. Therefore, government actions are necessary to reduce the fixed cost on the electricity or gas bill, and in cases of extreme poverty, subsidies that alleviate energy poverty, without forgetting that today it's necessary to implement social housing plans that prevent this type of situation with sustainable construction, especially glazing that can reduce energy demand up to 30%. This must also be linked to the installation of renewable energies through solar panels or other green energy that helps alleviate this energy poverty. We are going to have a problem in Europe as a result of the war in Ukraine now, where those states depend on the gas supply of other states with lack supply, causing a much greater level of energy poverty. It will no longer be a lack of poverty, thus to not being able to access energy due to lack of resources, but it will be due to lack of supply, and that is a big problem that we will see not only in Ukraine, but in countries such as Germany, Otros, Slovenia, etc. It will be less the case with France, Spain, Portugal, and the UK. Lack of supply will lead to a lack of alternatives for poor people. Energy poverty is a problem that cross borders. Energy poverty is a problem that crosses borders as recognized in the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations, which considers energy as a right and a primary necessity for health and human development. Energy poverty indicators. Disproportionate expenditure, defined as a percentage of households whose share of energy expenditure in income is more than double the national median. Hiding energy poverty refers to the percentage of households whose energy expenditure is less than half of the national median. Inability to maintain an adequate temperature in housing. 1.9 million households in Spain suffer from an inadequate temperature in their homes. Delayed payment of housing supply bills. 1.5 million households in Spain suffer delays in paying the electricity bill. That is why it's important the governments have sufficient knowledge and information about energy poverty through indicators that allow actions to reduce the percentage of the population that are exposed to such poverty. It is clear that it's not enough to reduce the fixed cost of bills, but sometimes it is necessary to have subsidy mechanisms such as electrical social bonds, energy rehabilitation measures for buildings, implementation of renewable energy, on change in current regulatory rules for large electricity companies, who are the big beneficiaries of energy consumption. Therefore, further work must be done on measures aimed at reducing the numbers of households in this situation and reducing the impact even more so in a period like the current one when energy costs continue to rise, which affects inflation. And with an energy-efficient housing stock in a global context of climate change. Energy poverty affects all the member states of the European Union in a different way. About 11% of the European population, which corresponds to 54 million Europeans, suffer the effects of energy poverty. The countries with the highest percentage are Bulgaria, 77%, Lithuania, 23%, Cyprus, 21%, Portugal and Greece, both with 17%. From 30% to 25% of households in energy poverty are in the Mediterranean area. There must be actions regarding the fixed cost of the electricity bill, subsidies and policies to accelerate the pace of renovation in buildings, to make them more efficient from an energy point of view and strengthen the performance of new buildings. Energy equality policies to reduce existing inequality. We should invest in energy communities that are a good means and take action to alleviate energy poverty. Energy communities allow renewable resources to be utilized where they are produced and activated citizen participation in energy production. Energy communities are built on the concept of local energy self-consumption, that is, the production of energy for own use, individually or collectively, and in the same place where it is generated. A fantastic and necessary action to accelerate the transition to a CO2-free energy system. The main objective will be to offer energy benefits from which environmental, economic, and social benefits are derived. At the European level, energy communities have been legally recognized within the Clean Energy for All Europeans package. Advantage of an energy community: abandonment of fossil fuels, carbon footprint reductions, increased consumption efficiency, reduction consumption efficiency, reduction of economic spending, possible solution to energy poverty. Energy communities are a key piece in the reorganization of energy, production and distribution systems, harnessing renewable resources, wherever they are seeking less dependency or even reducing to zero. The need to acquire energy outside the country. Energy communities help to fulfill key sustainable development goals, in particular 7, 11, and 13. Solutions. Short term, help people who suffer from energy poverty by lowering taxes, subsidizing the cost of the bill, reducing the price, and above all, controlling the price. In the medium term, a comprehensive tax reform to reduce poverty and raising taxes for those who have the most. Long term, faster transition to clean energy and a change in social housing construction models where the installation of renewable energy is mandatory. Other solutions at the government level help with subsidies to create energy communities more quickly, decouple the price of gas from that of electricity. Education in schools on how a world with a different consumption is possible and how to reduce energy consumption with actions, such as a motion sensor to avoid leaving the lights on. In general, establish a culture of energy saving that is healthier and more sustainable, of course. Promoting the use of renewable energy with sun, wind, waves, tides, rivers, in which Spain could be a potential energy country. This culture of energy saving would prevent, for example, that energy consumption in a house in Spain, on average, emits 1 ton of CO2 into the atmosphere every year. We have to go to green energy consumption and democratize decarbonization in society. Let's reduce poverty and be able to reduce energy poverty. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ramon Riera. Very interesting points. I think that this a very modern point is on the table of most of governments and regulations. So we are going directly to our last presentation. It's also about energy poverty. It's coming from our colleague from Greece, Nikolaos. Are you there? Hi, Nico. Yeah. Here's Nico. So Nikolaos is from the Thessaloniki University, and he is going to present some of their research about energy poverty. Go ahead. So the floor is yours.
Yeah.
You have to share your presentation.
Yes, I'm trying.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Take a few. It's a while. Yes. Good.
I don't know why this doesn't work.
Maybe we can share for you and you can speak. Okay.
No, because yesterday presentation I sent you, Paloma, is changed.
Has changed. Oh, okay. But I think it's allowed to share, right? So you can share just clicking the green button.
Yes, I'm
You are
trying.
trying,
Sorry.
but you did it. We saw it.
Probably now.
Well, energy poverty is one of the key issues now. Let me say something
okay?
about this. Yeah, now.
No?
Yes. Just
Okay.
wait a while. That yes, it's connected. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, I will talk about how to address energy poverty at the scale of a suburban area. That is to talk about the problems in achieving the better use of resources devoted to buildings energy retrofitting when working with the buildings in the cities. So, what is energy poverty? Already this was explained. What is energy poverty? I had to underline that energy poverty is now a priority for the European Union, and there is a lot of capitals of sources of funding that will be used in the future. The thing is how we will use these resources. I'll point out on location and scale. Energy poverty does not horizontally occur. There are not all the households that faces the problem of energy poverty. It's the more vulnerable households that faces this problem. So there is a very important spatial dimension of energy poverty that has not been overlooked. And this is apparent and very important at the scale of the city. To which part of the city we have to intervene in order to ameliorate the conditions of energy poverty. And of course, when we talk about energy poverty, this is connected to the household, to the problems that face, especially during the last month. The problems are many. One of the most important problem is that has not been addressed yet, to the best of my knowledge, is how we can intervene in practice to ameliorate the situation in the densely built urban districts with extensive stock of buildings of decaying, multi-story residential buildings, listed buildings that have to face a lot of problem from many aspects, as we will see. So the one is the first allocation. To which part of the city? Certainly in the future, all the cities, all the buildings will be or have to begin energy efficient. But energy poverty is a problem that has to be that we have to deal immediately. And the scale. Most of the research and practice until now refers to intervention in buildings or in individual units. The impact of energy efficiency grows when an entire multi-story building is retrofitted, but it is greater when groups of connected buildings are upgraded together with their surrounding open space, and thus improvement leading to an improvement of the thermal environment and consequently the quality of life of tenants, and also to an improved local microclimate. So it's more adequate in order to optimize our actions against energy poverty and to achieve and to synergies and more efficiency. We have to work on the urban district scale. But this is a problem. Because it's always difficult to touch cities that are in urban areas that are already built, and there is a complex social and economic life in these areas. Also, the European Commission, during the last 2 years, underlines that and suggests that the retrofitting of buildings at the neighborhood scale is the most adequate. But energy planning at the urban scale is a weak problem. How we can intervene in neighborhoods and districts, urban districts? Urban planning has a central role to play in preparing old cities to become sustainable. But urban planning policies to the most of European countries is far from emphasizing the urgency to retrofit entire declining districts and from directing efforts to it. Energy poverty fuels many social processes that are expressed spatially as imprints of environmental degradation. Energy poverty is present in degraded areas, and these areas have the very huge problem of the market inefficiency, the real estate market inefficiency in their areas. This means that the prices are very low and the rents are very low, and the neighborhood environment, the urban environment, is in bad conditions. So investments in these areas are difficult, and energy retrofitting of the buildings is much more difficult because of the low price, the low value of the buildings in these areas. Energy poverty may provoke social and cultural exclusion and economic downfall of urban districts, because when buildings are not energy efficient, they are not, of course, in the screen of the companies and the residents and the people. So this situation will contribute to the further degradation of the urban district. So deep energy retrofit to entire neighborhoods may transform cities because energy retrofits may be the drivers of inclusive cities that become low carbon and socially sustainable. In order to achieve the goal of sustainable cities and energy retrofitting to combat energy poverty, we have to introduce and to act regarding energy poverty and to use planning policies, planning and urban planning and urban policies as a catalyst regarding the climate change, energy, and poverty nexus. So what happens in Greece? The indicators and the data shows that regarding housing affordability, the situation in Greece is very bad. According to research by the Greek Statistics Authority on the danger of energy poverty, last year 30% of the nation's population faced the danger of energy poverty or social exclusion. This is a very high number, and actually the percentage is higher. Attempts in Greece targeting urban climate change have been of very low impact as they remain horizontal and fragmented, and they totally lack of spatial dimension. We only see the numbers, but we are not concentrated in the problem within certain urban areas where are the more socially sensitive. Popular energy retrofit programs that have been available for energy upgrades in the last decade almost always regard partial intervention in individual units that are frequently distributed in multi-story buildings, whereas eligibility criteria do not sufficiently connect with high environmental benefits. Energy retrofits of existing buildings in Greek cities have failed to be of impact, and they do not address the urban scale, as to the best of my knowledge, in other countries also. The challenges are very important: socioeconomic, market-related, technical, and economic in Greece, and include socioeconomic barriers, the most important of which is the fragmentation of buildings due to many small property ownerships. Thus, this is called in Greece horizontal properties. So we can find many owners in one building, and this renders difficult the coordination and the decision to proceed to the energy retrofit of the whole building. There are other barriers. The most important is the bureaucracy and the lack of efficiency of the public administration. And there are many other technical challenges which are related to the construction features of the buildings, but also I would add the procedures of the necessary procedures that the owners have to follow in order to have the permit to intervene in the buildings. Athens is an example of city which faces one of the most faces the problem of energy poverty, because there are a lot of old buildings, and the city is built very densely. When we have to deal with the problem of energy poverty and energy retrofitting, we have to proceed with urban renewal processes and urban renewal programs. The problem is very important because in Greece there are no social housing providing authorities. There are no social housing provision from the state. The ownership rate is high, and this means that the problem, this phenomenon, concerns private house properties. And why this is a problem? Because when we have one owner, for example, the state, it's possible to take measures that that may that can be effective. But when we have multiple owners, this becomes very difficult. In fact, when we see energy projects of energy retrofit in other countries, we see that most of them concern social housing. So, which could be the objectives of a policy for an urban policy for energy retrofitting of the existing buildings? To deal with energy poverty in urban areas, we must proceed through an integrated spatial approach, or it is suggested, as European Union also suggests. There is a need to cover the deficit of planning policy regarding urban interventions related to the reduction of energy poverty due to energy inefficient building stocks in targeted areas. For this, we try to develop a methodology that could help public authorities to intervene in the cities. First, we are trying to develop a methodology for mapping energy poverty in urban areas and to detect the most vulnerable city areas. As I told you before, it's recommended to intervene in the most sensible urban areas, and this is not easy to detect them, as we will show with maps later. Also to identify the urban policies and urban planning strategies and measures to tackle energy poverty, aiming at reducing the energy need in entire neighborhoods. And also to develop a methodology that facilitates decision-making on urban energy efficiency intervention, and propose also the appropriate actions, measures, and develop urban planning tools and regulations that are needed in order to achieve the cost-benefit ratio, economic and social, in the use of resources allocated to face climate change. I will show you some examples to understand the difficulties to intervene in the already built areas, old areas. Here we see a map of the Athens city center, and you can understand the problem of the multi-ownership of buildings. You see that most of the buildings belongs to more than one owner, and when this happens, the owner is the public sector. We talk about public buildings, or sometimes the church or foundation. You see, we found buildings with more than 120 owners. You understand that it's very difficult to intervene and in these buildings, and of course in these areas, because if we want to work in an area of a neighborhood of about 5 or 10 building blocks, we have to deal with some thousands of owners. The other problem is the horizontal and vertical segregation in Athens and in Greek city generally. You see in this map that the social segregation is very intense in the core, in the old areas of the cities, and where in these areas are inhabited from the most vulnerable social strata, the most vulnerable population. And this is horizontal and vertical. So what we mean about that? We mean that in some parts of the areas there is less social segregation and population that is difficult to identify because there is the vertical segregation too, and in the multi-story buildings we see that at the lower stories are inhabited by very vulnerable persons, population, migrants, or others, and the higher levels in the buildings, the higher stories of the buildings, are inhabited by more by medium classes or upper classes at the same building. So horizontal measures as are applied by now are not efficient, but from the other side, when we have to intervene in areas and in the whole buildings, and then there we have problems of financing and many other problems that is very important to resolve. For example, we work in a small.
Nico,
yes.
We are out of time, please.
Okay.
Go to the hand if possible.
I would like you to show an example of, okay. So this is my point. The point is that we have to develop strategies and measures to work in an urban area in order to produce synergies and to make better use of the available funds, create also economies of scale, and thus will facilitate energy poverty problem the solution.
Yeah.
And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Nico. I'm so sorry for cutting you. Very interesting. I think that this panel has put on the table quite important issues related to housing affordability and energy poverty. The practical issues that Nico told at the end are one of the key interventions we have to do. We are working also on this. Because it's one thing is to say, well, we are going to decarbonize all the buildings, and another completely different thing is how to do it. Yeah. And Nico has put on the table most of the important issues. Unfortunately, we are out of time. I have many questions here prepared for the speakers, but no time for that. So let me thanks to all my colleagues in REM and Ramon Riera, the presenters here and the efforts to do the presentation. And let me pass the floor to Elena Beunza to close the activity. Thank you. Thank you, Elena.
Okay, thank you very much, Paloma, and thank you to all the speakers. I think this is a magnificent way to pre-start what the Affordable Housing Activation Forum will be the next 3 days taking place here in Madrid. I would like to invite you all to join us. There will be #1 speakers and very interesting themes to be debated and to be treated. Just to close, I would like to make a very short reflection about how all these issues that we have talked about are being implemented and are being tackled by the different countries. From my point of view as the former General Secretary for Housing for the government of Spain, and due to the fact that we are today here in Madrid, I would like to explain very briefly how the Spanish government has addressed the main issues that have been put on the table. For the first time in our democracy, the Spanish government has prepared a Housing National Act following recommendations by the United Nations. It is true that housing policies have a very important local and regional level, but at the same time, United Nations has always referred to the importance of national principles and guides and acts to be developed by the national governments. Following some of the themes that have been developed today, they have also put in place a very big program aiming the development of publicly owned land. The government has already started developing the land owned by the national government and has put into place very important regulations in order to foster and to facilitate for local and regional governments to put in the market their developed land for residential use. Finally, I do not want to close this event without making a mention to the Next Generation EU funds related to urban regeneration and urban renewal. It is true that, as Paloma just mentioned, it seems that every day we are inventing the wheel, as we say in Spain, in relation to how we make this effective, how we are defining our neighborhoods, how we determine what kind of intervention should be done, how we define also which areas are better managed with a public management, with public-private management, and which ones should be more developed by exclusively private management. All those are questions that should be defined during the next, I would like to say the next years, but that is not the case. Those should be defined during the next month. And we must make them real, because Next Generation EU funds, I want to remind, must be totally spent before June 2026. And therefore, all these neighborhood participation processes that are absolutely necessary for successful urban renewal processes should be already taking place. I know, at least, that in Spain, local governments are completely aware of the situation and have started developing these programs. Probably not, and this is also something very interesting, through the urban land planning processes, because, and this is also something that has also been pointed out, we need to refresh, we need to rethink about the urban land processes developments, because they are too slow and too rigid in general. They do not reflect and cannot be flexible enough to respond to society needs. Therefore, other ways are being defined to establish these urban renewal processes, at least in Spain. But I'm sure that we all as a society will be able to put in place the right mechanisms to tackle energy poverty and urban regeneration in the right way and in the right time. Thank you very much.